Good evening. This evening, we are pleased to have one of our HLAA board members, Valerie Stafford-Mallis, present to us communication strategies for surviving the workplace or job market. But first, I just want to take a moment to refresh everybody's memory about where features of the platform are. If you need captions, the CC button is at the top, probably right above my head, under the Help menu. Just click that, and you can open the captioning pod and customize that, move that around your screen however you'd like to do that, to make it more comfortable for you. If you have a burning question that won't wait until the end of Valerie's presentation, there's a little icon that's a hand right in the list of participants. Right there you'll see 4 icons. Just click on that hand and I'll alert Valerie that someone has a question. But in the meantime, if you have questions, maybe just save them for the end of her presentation, and I will go ahead and voice those questions to Valerie so that she can answer those, and all of that will be in the part transcript. Just a little bit about Valerie. She's fairly new to the HLAA Board of Trustees, appointed back in May of 2013, and she serves on both the nominating and the membership committees. She's the Business Development Manager for Alternative Communication Services, ACS. Many of you are familiar with them. They're often in our exhibit hall, and Mike Cano of ACS provides CART in our demo room, and he's fabulous. Prior to joining ACS, Valerie served as the Health Educator Consultant for the Florida Coordinating Council for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. She is oral, late-deafened adult who uses bilateral cochlear implants. And tonight we are very happy to have Valerie present, as I mentioned, communication strategies for surviving the workplace or job market. Hit it, Valerie.
All right, thank you, Nancy. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of your questions, and let's get started. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about the communication needs as they relate to the workplace for people with hearing loss. And it's a broad topic, so we're not going to be able to go into everything in depth, but we'd just like to give you some idea of some of the resources that are out there to help, talk about some of the issues that people with hearing loss face in the workplace, and give you some tools that will help you select accommodations that will work for you and to feel comfortable with using them and self-advocate. As Nancy mentioned, I am late-deafened myself. I have bilateral cochlear implants. I began losing my hearing when I was about 19, and I was in my mid-50s by the time I got around to getting cochlear implants, which was probably about 10 years later than I should have gotten them. And the reason I'm mentioning that to you is because I lost my hearing during my entire working career and did not know what to do about it. I did not understand what was happening to me as my hearing was decreasing. I did not know about the accommodations that were available to me. I did not know what my rights and responsibilities were under the law. And therefore, I did not lose my hearing as well as I could have. I suffered greatly in terms of my career. And if I had $1 for every time I've said, if I had known then what I know now, things would have been much different. I still would have gone deaf, of course, but I think I would have coped with it much, much more effectively in terms of my work life. So what I want to do is to share some of those things with you in hopes that you will benefit from the things that I didn't know when I needed to know them. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I'm going to be talking about some of the laws, but I want you to understand clearly and up front that I am not an attorney. And nothing that I am telling you is intended to be legal advice, so I don't want to get accused of practicing law without a license. So please, 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 this is just for information. If you have specific legal questions, I would encourage you to seek legal advice, and that's not what you're going to get here. So I just want to make that disclaimer up front. There are three main laws that I believe apply particularly to people with hearing loss in the workplace. The first law is actually quite old, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It was the forerunner of the ADA, and it really talked about the rights of persons with disabilities as they apply to activities of daily living. However, this law only applied to entities that received federal funding, and the definition of disability was much more narrow than it is now. But this law still is in effect. It still has relevance, and if you're working with people with disabilities, you'll still hear references to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and Section 508. So 508 especially is getting a lot of attention now in making websites accessible to persons with disabilities. So I don't want you to forget about it. I do want you to know that it's out there, but it's not the one that we hear so much about anymore. The one that we really hear about now is the ADA. The ADA is nothing new. It has been around since 1990. It underwent a major revision with amendments in 2008 that went into effect in 2010. A lot of people don't realize that the ADA has multiple titles, and each one is a little bit different. Title I covers employment, and we're going to be talking more about that. Title I contains the phrase reasonable accommodation, which I think everybody has heard. Maybe we don't always have a clear understanding of what that means, but we've heard it. However, when you start looking at Titles II and III, which cover government entities and private businesses, you will not see reasonable accommodation in there. What you will see is equal access to programs and services. So sometimes people go into a business and they start demanding a reasonable accommodation, and that's not really what the law says. But I just want you to know about that. And then Title IV covers telecommunications. There's another title, Title V, that we don't hear much about. For the purpose of today's conversation, we're going to talk about Title I. But what you need to know about the ADA as it has evolved over the years is that it now covers virtually all entities, both public and private. There are some exceptions. Churches are one. The other thing that has happened as the ADA has evolved is there is a much broader definition of what is a disability. And that's relevant to those of us with hearing loss because the ADA, the amended ADA, I should say, places hearing loss as a disability that's every bit as important as some of the other more visible disabilities. And what that means is it's just as important to provide access to equal and effective communication as it is to provide entrance into a building or entrance into a restroom. So that's a huge thing for people with hearing loss, that to have hearing loss spelled out now as one of the disabilities that the ADA covers. The third law that is relatively new is the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. And this also has titles. What's important about this is it has strengthened the coverage of digital communications and making those accessible to persons with disabilities. You may have noticed that more and more videos that you access on the internet are captioned. You may notice that more and more of your television programming is captioned. You may have noticed if you purchased telecommunications equipment that it's easier to get the captions than it used to be. All of those things are thanks to the Communications and Video Accessibility Act. Also, you may have been hearing about making 911 accessible to persons with disabilities, particularly hearing loss, and also emergency messaging. All of those things are coming from the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. So this is the newest one of the disability laws that I'm mentioning tonight. It's very exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, and you will continue to see changes. So it's, as I say, it is a great time to be a person with hearing loss because we have laws that help us get what we need. We also have the technology now to get what we need. So there's really no reason for a person not to be accessing equal and effective communication now. So we will talk about that a little bit more and what that means. So those are the laws. The bottom line is we all have a right to understand and to be understood. Employers and local and state governments now are working very hard to meet our needs and to make their programs and services accessible. It's very, very important. But the thing you need to understand about the ADA and the other laws is, even though they have a broader concept of disability and hearing loss has more protections than it's ever had, employers are not required to provide an accommodation if it will present an undue burden to their business or fundamentally alter the way that they do business. So that's where the gray area comes in. What is an undue burden? What is a fundamental alteration of a way of doing business? And that's why these things are all decided on a case-by-case basis. However, we're going to talk about some of the broad guidelines of reasonable accommodations and how you might use those and give you a better understanding of that. Remember, at its heart, the ADA is a civil rights law. A lot of people don't realize that. And so it's all about equal access, just like any civil rights law is. And it includes now both public and private entities. And the gold standard is access to programs and activities equivalent to persons without disabilities. So that's kind of the underlying heart of the ADA and the other laws. Now, what does all this mean? Self-advocacy. You can have all the laws in the world, but if you're not comfortable in asking for what you need and you don't know how to do that effectively and you don't understand what rights and responsibilities you have when you want to ask for what you need, it all is for naught. So we're going to talk a lot about self-advocacy. I believe that it's really important to understand your hearing loss. First of all, you are the expert on your hearing loss. My hearing loss is not the same as yours. And nobody knows better than you what your hearing loss is like. So, the first thing that I tell people to do is take a deep breath, accept the fact that you do have hearing loss. It is substantially impacting major activities of your daily life. It's not going to be easy, and at times you are going to feel like it's unfair or you are disadvantaged. But that's just the way it is. That's the way it is for any person with a disability. The thing that a lot of people don't understand when you have hearing loss is that there is no such thing as casual listening. There's no such thing as easy listening. You struggle to listen and you use all of your senses to listen to try to make up for what your ears are not hearing. It's really important to be upfront with yourself and to understand specific job-oriented situations where you struggle. Is it being in a cubicle farm where there are conversations going on around you? Is it being located close to the copy machine where there's all of that noise? Is it trying to use the telephone? Do you do all right with the telephone when it's quiet, but if there's background noise you don't hear? Are you able to follow a conversation one-on-one pretty well if you can see the person, but you struggle if there are multiple speakers or if you can't get a good sight line on the speaker's face? Do you do all right in person, but you struggle if there are videos? You need to know. And when you're looking at a job or a job description, you need to be able to analyze what are the critical duties of that job and are they likely to cause me to struggle to hear. A lot of people, when they're first diagnosed with hearing loss, think that they can make up for it by speech reading. And we all speech read when we have hearing loss, but even the best speech reader only catches about 30% of what gets said. And that's because when you speech read, you're only able to read the consonants that are formed at the lips, and not all consonants are formed at the lips. So it's not 100% effective. When I was first diagnosed with my hearing loss, I thought, oh, that's okay. You know, I can just learn to read lips, and if I work really hard, I can overcome that. And if you have mild hearing loss, frequently you can. But what happens as your hearing loss progresses is it requires more and more effort, and you're relying more and more on speech reading because you're not hearing the consonants and the vowels. And after a while, you run up against the biology of your hearing loss. So that's why you need to be upfront with yourself about what's going on. Accommodations are just like our hearing loss. One size does not fit all. And I'm not going to tell you tonight that there's only one right answer or one way to do it. All of us come to the realization of what our hearing loss means to us in terms of functional on-the-job capacities in a different way. I really struggled with this. I had a hard time asking for help. I had a hard time admitting that I needed help. I had a hard time breaking through my anger and my frustration at what was happening to me. But what I found to be most helpful, what really was the breakthrough moment for me, was when I went to my audiologist and I said, I'm struggling on the job and I don't really understand why I'm struggling. I don't really understand what to tell people. And as a consequence, I'm not doing well on the job. But I said, if you wrote me a description, imagine you were talking about me to a third person and wrote a description of the types of activities that my hearing loss would make me most likely to struggle with on the job. And if I had that in my hands and I could read it, I said, I think that would really help me understand objectively what my capabilities are and where my limitations are, and it would help me talk about that to somebody else. So this audiologist was very kind. She had been treating me for several years, and she said, sure, I'll be happy to do that. So she did, and when I got the letter, I want you to know that every single job that I had had, the key positions, the key activities of that job, every single one of them were the things that my audiologist said would cause me the most difficulty because of my hearing loss. So what that meant was I was absolutely trying to do the wrong kinds of work for someone with my hearing loss. And that was just a game changer for me. So if you're finding that you have a hard time being objective by yourself or identifying where you're struggling, ask somebody you trust. It could be a colleague at work. It could be your audiologist. It could be a dear friend. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you go to the Hearing Loss Association meetings, you'll find lots of good speakers that can help you with that. But this is key. You just got to have it. Because without it, you might be asking for the wrong thing. You might continue to make the same mistake over and over. It's just not going to work for you. And it's really important when you begin to ask for accommodations that you're asking for something, number one, that's really going to help you. And number two, you know how to state the case for it and how it's going to improve your job performance. So that is just so important. I can't emphasize that enough. Because remember, when you request an accommodation from your employer, they do not necessarily have to give you what you're asking for. If another accommodation will be equally effective, they can provide that. So if you're not conversant about what you need and why you need it, you might not be able to defend your case when you ask for a cart rider and they say, well, I think we can just pass notes back and forth, or you can just speech read. Well, if you don't understand your functional limitations, how are you going to explain to someone, well, speech reading is not really going to help me at this point? The other thing that you need to do is to be flexible. Let's say you're going to a meeting and you would like to have a caption writer in the room to write the captions for you so you can read them. And your employer says, well, you know what? That costs too much money. Why don't we just do speech recognition software? Why don't we just do Dragon Naturally Speaking? That's cheap. Well, do you know? Have you ever tried it? Do you understand what it is? Maybe it'll help you, maybe it won't. But maybe a midpoint would be having a remote cart writer or remote caption writer like we're doing here today. That might be the intermediate point. So you really have to understand all of those things. If you're an individual who needs a sign language interpreter and you request to have an interpreter in the room with you, they might say, well, you know, that costs too much money. How about a video remote interpreter? So if you haven't investigated the options, you won't know. So just, you know, you have to do your homework first, and that may not be fair, but it's the hardest part. But it's so necessary. Your attitude is going to be so important, and I know it's hard. When I was on the job with uncompensated hearing loss and struggling with my hearing loss, I was spending so much effort to try to hear that I had headaches. My face was usually scrunched up in a frown because I was concentrating so hard. I got too close to people because I was trying to speech read. And I didn't fit in because I was not communicating with them and they could not communicate with me. But it's important when you're in a workplace and you're requesting an accommodation that you're seen as a team player. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing is you've done your homework so you're comfortable, you're able to be upfront with people about what you need. You are appreciative of others' efforts to support you, even if it's just as simple as somebody making sure that you can see them before they start speaking to you. You thank them. If you're in a meeting and you don't catch something, if somebody writes it down for you, you thank them. When you request captioning or a sign language interpreter or an assistive listening device and those are provided for you, you thank them. An area where I fell down was I was so focused on my effort to try to hear that I failed to empathize with what it was like to have me in the workplace. I didn't realize that I was loud on the telephone. I made a lot of noises, voluntary and involuntary, that because I didn't hear them, I assumed others didn't hear them. As I mentioned, I was frustrated. So it's really important that you're aware of others and that you empathize with others' attempts to try to help you. be collegial, build positive relationships. There's a huge difference between wanting to help somebody and feeling like you have to help somebody. And I did not always expend the amount of effort that would have served me well at team building and making people want to help me. I was so focused on what wasn't happening in my anger and my frustration. You want to show your dedication to the employer and to your work group and let them know that you're a team player and add value. Be a strong contributor. Even if you don't always hear everything that's said, you can contribute value in other ways, and it's really important to find that. Volunteer to take on tasks that are within your capabilities, particularly if you're having to ask to have other tasks removed. For instance, I was in a workplace where one of the jobs of everybody on a rotating basis was to take turns answering the phone during the lunch hour so the receptionist could get a break. Well, obviously, that was a recipe for disaster with me, so I got out of that. But I never offered to do anything else to take up the slack. And that didn't always sit well with my coworkers. So just to be aware of that is important. And it's important to let people know the things that you are doing to try to add value to the workplace. When you go above and beyond in an appropriate way, in a team building way, let your supervisor know, let your coworkers know what you're doing to balance out what they're doing for you. Very, very important. And if you're not sure about how to do this, or if you're experiencing difficulty, meet with your supervisor. If your employment is large enough that you have a human resources department, meet with HR. See what they can suggest and let them help you. In large organizations, when you request an accommodation, you may request the accommodation from your manager, but your manager is going to forward it to HR. So human resources will get involved, and that's not a bad thing. Don't be intimidated. Just know that it will happen. And the good news is that more and more human resources officers are learning about disabilities in general and persons with hearing loss in particular, because it's such a common disability. And if you've done all of these things and nothing seems to be working and you're still experiencing difficulty, then document. Make notes to files, memos to files with dates and times and what you did and what you were told and what happened. You might need that down the road. So I've talked a lot about identifying your communication needs. Where do the biggest challenges happen? This is really, really important. For me, it started with telephones. I could do everything else pretty well, but the phone was awful. Then it got to the point where on social events where there were background noises going on, I couldn't function in those. And then it got to the point with meetings where I couldn't get within 3 to 6 feet of the speaker and maintain a full frontal view of the speaker's mouth. Those things began to cause me problems. So it will change over time. But if you look at the essential duties of your job description, look at it very, very carefully and think about where do those challenges happen and what accommodations are available. Think high and low tech. If you don't know what accommodations are available, there are lots of resources that can help you. I'm going to show you some of those in just a minute. But don't isolate yourself. Go to the Hearing Loss Association meetings if there's one in your area. Go to the Association of Late-Deafened Adults. Go on the internet. There are some great resources on the internet that I'm going to show you so that you can educate yourself. This is not something that naturally comes to you. This is not something that when you lose your hearing, you all of a sudden know what you need to help overcome it. No, you don't. And it requires a tremendous amount of perseverance on your part. I happen to think that when it comes to technological innovations and accommodations, that the Hearing Loss Association of America is so technologically oriented. And when I began associating with people from Hearing Loss Association of America, I was totally amazed at how much knowledge there was about technology and how I could use it. Some of your chapters even have peer mentors that will take you under their wing and let you try the technology out hands-on, all kinds of things. When you begin to identify your communication needs and think about what might help you, how are you going to know if it's successful? How are you going to define success? Are you going to define success as being able to understand everything that gets said 100% of the time? If that's your definition, you might be frustrated. But if you can follow along in a meeting with captioning or with a pocket talker, if you can have someone taking notes for you, that might be success for you. If you can get an amplified telephone, that might be success for you. If you can learn how to access web-based captioning for telephone calls, that might be success for you. You have to try the things out and see if they work for you, and that's how you determine success. So, thinking about those places where the biggest challenges happen on your job, do you have to contact clients by telephone? Do you have to do it in the office, or do you have to do it out in the field? Do you have to participate in conference calls? Again, out in the office or in the field? Do you have group meetings with coworkers? Are those group meetings with coworkers conducted face-to-face, or are they conducted using a web platform such as we're doing today? Do you have face-to-face meetings with your boss? Do you have multiple bosses? Or do you have face-to-face meetings with your boss over the internet? How do you handle the company picnic or Christmas party? Do you work in a cubicle? All of those things you have to think through, and you have to talk to other people with hearing loss to see how they handle that. And there are great resources from the Job Accommodation Network. I'm going to show that to you, that you can actually go online to the Job Accommodation Network and type your question in, and they'll respond to you. It's www.askjan.org, and they have a chat feature. There is a book that the Job Accommodation Network puts out. It's in the Accommodation and Compliance series, and it's called Employees with Hearing Loss. Now, this is slanted primarily towards the employer, but I find it very, very helpful because it helps you, number one, empathize with how your employer is going to look at it, and number two, it has job-specific situations where people have written in and said, okay, I have this situation, what do I need? And it talks about the common accommodations that are used in the workplace and that by and large are not considered to present an undue burden to employers. So it's really, really helpful. You can just Google Job Accommodation Network, employees with hearing loss, and it will come up. The other resource that I really like comes from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it's Facts About Deafness. I have, as you can see here, I have the URL for the document. And again, this has situation-specific scenarios for persons with hearing loss. This is kind of old. I think it came out in 2008 or 2009, but it still has great relevance. And these two documents can help educate you about common workplace scenarios that cause people with hearing loss trouble, and also the accommodations that can help. So it can help you match the solution with the need, which is really, really important. And it will also help you state the case for the accommodation and how it can help you with the functional limitation that you're experiencing on the job. Because always when you're asking for an accommodation, you want to be able to show the employer what's in it for them to provide you with the accommodation. These are some of the accommodations that you will find mentioned in these two documents. Amplified telephones, captioning and videos in web meetings, sign language interpreters, speech-to-text services, assistive listening devices, flashing lights for telephones, reduced ambient noise, having an office as opposed to a cubicle, that's a big one, not always possible, and modifying some of the non-essential duties of your job description. Keep in mind that the ADA does not protect you from not being able to perform the essential duties of your job with accommodation. So if you're not performing your job duties effectively and employers provide accommodation and you're still not performing, it doesn't mean they have to keep you. So that's really, really important. And a lot of people don't understand that. So it's not a get out of jail pass, pass go, do anything you want. You still have to follow company procedures. You still need to be capable of performing the essential duties of your job either with or without accommodation. If you travel, understand that some of the accommodations that you need for travel might not be the same as what you need when you're in the office. For instance, when I travel, when I remove my external processors to my cochlear implant, I hear nothing that goes on. Therefore, I can't hear wake-up calls. I have a bed shaker that attaches to an alarm clock that I travel with. And I purchased that myself rather than ask my employer to provide it. But if travel is an essential part of your job duties, and getting up on time and getting to appointments is an essential part of your job duties, you can certainly request this accommodation. But it's been my experience in the workplace that employers want to see teamwork, and they want to see that you have some skin in the game too. So what I try to do for myself is to provide whatever accommodations I can myself that don't present an undue burden to me. And then I'll ask the employer to provide the accommodations that might be outside of my price range. And for me, that's I ask for captioning for webinars and conference calls. So it's a give and take. But it's really important for you to know what's out there. I always recommend to people that when they're requesting an accommodation, that part of the homework they do beforehand is to research how the accommodation can be obtained, what the prices are, and what the sources are. Do you have to do that? No, absolutely you do not. But if you're requesting an accommodation of the employer, to me it's respectful to remember that the employer is not in the accommodation business. They're in the business of providing whatever product or service they do. So to the extent that you can make providing that accommodation easy and cost-effective, I believe that that increases your chances of getting that accommodation. And my experience has borne that out. So there are some wonderful resources out there. Job Accommodation Network is one that can help you find out what's on the market, investigate how much does it cost, do your homework beforehand. Hearing aids. Hearing aids are not an accommodation under any disability law. Unfortunately, they are your responsibility to provide. Some insurances will cover some of the cost, most do not. I learned something yesterday that I did not know. I knew that Medicare did not pay for hearing aids, and most insurance companies will base a lot of their coverages on what Medicare provides. Medicare does not provide hearing aids or coverage for hearing aids because that's the way the statute was written when it was approved in 1965. So it's going to take a lot of work to get hearing aids widely provided by insurance and governmental third-party payers. The Affordable Care Act does not specifically provide hearing aids either. There are some not loopholes, but there are some angles that people are looking at to see if they can effectively advocate within the Affordable Care Act for hearing aids, but currently not provided. However, despite that, and despite the expense, hearing aids really can help most people. They won't give you 20/20 hearing like these eyeglasses that I have on, but they really can help people. So if you haven't thought about hearing aids, or if you had hearing aids recommended to you and you say, oh, they're too expensive, I can't afford those, I would encourage you to give that a second thought. Hearing loss is insidious, and most of us do not really understand how much we're missing. And that's, hearing aids can help. So I would encourage you to look at that. There are some diverse ways of acquiring hearing aids now. I would encourage you to look into that. Again, the Hearing Aid Industry Association is one resource that you can go to, and you can also talk to the people at the Job Accommodation Network and your local hearing loss association chapters. All of those people can give you good information about hearing aids. Hearing Loss Association of America has a resource that came out in 2009, actually, the Employment Toolkit. And most of what I'm talking with you about today is contained in this Employment Toolkit. And you can get to it by going to www.hearingloss.org. The Employment Toolkit is in the process of being revised, but what's on the toolkit now is still relevant. And I wanted you to see this because I would encourage you, if you'd like some written reinforcement for some of the things that we've talked about today, I would encourage you to download that. Now let's talk about changing jobs. A lot of what we've talked about for getting accommodations on the job that you already have in terms of knowing your disability, understanding your functional limitations, understanding what helps you. A lot of those things are homework that will also serve you well when you're in the job market. When you're applying for a job, I believe it's important, number one, to only apply for those jobs for which you're qualified. If you have a disability and you're going to be requesting accommodations, you're going to want to demonstrate that you can do the job for which you're applying. And having a work history that demonstrates that is really, really important. Understanding cross-transferable skill sets. If you haven't done that particular job before, but you've done other jobs that utilize the critical skills that the job you're applying for has, that's fine. But it's not a time to stretch and apply for something that you're not qualified for if you're going to be requesting accommodations once you get the job. So if you would like to do something and you don't feel like you're qualified or you don't have the skills, develop new skills. You can get experience through volunteer work, you can do self-directed study, you can take advantage of training opportunities on the job, all of those things. And you can put those things in a resume when you're applying for work. The issue of disclosure comes up over and over and over, and it's a personal thing. There's no one right or wrong answer, but I believe when you're applying for a job, inserting your hearing loss into your cover letter or into your initial inquiry does not set the stage for you showcasing what you do best. Unless you're applying for a position working with people with disabilities, then it can be an ace in the hole. But I would instead concentrate on the features of your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and how they can be applied to the job for which you're applying and how they can benefit the employer. And I think you can save the disclosure for a later point in the job application process. So let's say you've written a great resume, you've written a great cover letter, and now they called you. They want you to come in for an interview, or they want to do a web-based interview. Now what do? Well, this is where your homework that you've done, understanding where your functional limitations are, understanding what you can do well with an accommodation and what you can do well without an accommodation. This will guide you. If you need an accommodation for the interview, it's very important that you have it. Do not try to fake it because you will not succeed, number one, and you may come across as being disinterested or not capable when the fact of the matter is you simply haven't heard. So, if it's an interview and you need someone to help you with communication access, you ask for it. You say, I'm thrilled to be coming in for this interview, and I'm so excited about discussing with you the aspects of my background that I can bring to play on the job. I need to ask you if it'll be possible to have either a sign language interpreter, if that's what you use, or a caption writer, if that's what you need, or a note taker, or an assistive listening device. To tell the employer that this is what you need in order to best communicate with them and to have a most effective interview. If it's a telephone interview, you may be home free if you're comfortable with using web-based captioning, web CapTel, or if you have a caption telephone. Perhaps you might be able to do the interview with that. If there are multiple interviewers, that can be difficult. So you find out and you think, oh my goodness, well if I do that, then they're not going to hire me. Well, do you really want to work someplace where you're going to be under constant pressure to do a job and not have the tools that you need to do the job? So, you know, it's a risk. Is it illegal? Yes, of course it's illegal. Does it happen? Absolutely. So you just have to kind of become philosophic about it and say, if that's the way they are, I wouldn't want to work there anyway. All right, you're on the interview. You're comfortable with your hearing loss. Let's say you've requested an accommodation, so they know you have hearing loss. Now forget about your hearing loss and instead concentrate on selling your skills, experience, your competence, your self-assurance, and your personality, because now what you want to sell is the fact that you can do the job, number one, and number two, that you're going to be a good fit. And fit is actually something employers worry about more than they worry about skills. They may tell you the skills are most important, but really when you're interviewing, what they're doing is trying to figure out, are you going to be a good fit? And however they define fit, that's why you do your due diligence beforehand and try to learn as much as you can about the company and the people with whom you're interviewing, so you can define in your mind what is a good fit and is that me? And then you can sell what it is that you bring to the job. Always, 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 you want to make clear what you can do for the employer. Position the accommodation as the tool that allows your skills, abilities, and experiences to shine and to jump off the page and help that employer and make their workplace a better place. All right, you got the job. Yay! Now what you have to do is figure out, how am I going to interact with all of these people and communicate with them? This is where persistence and patience and creativity are so, so necessary, because the battle is won on a case-by-case basis. You will have to educate and inform everyone with whom you come into contact. One thing that I found to be helpful on the job was, number one, to be upfront with people, and I developed a little communication tips sheet that was specific for me. And I gave it to people. And, you know, when we would start meetings, I would find it necessary sometimes to remind people but it was really, really important to do that. And I began to succeed when I began to operate from the standpoint that everybody wanted to help me. They were not out to get me. They wanted to help. And I was going to give them the tools to do that. At least get a hearing aid compatible amplified telephone, if nothing else. And if you can get some sort of a headset if you're in a cubicle farm so it doesn't bother other people, that will be greatly appreciated, because these amplified telephones can be very, very loud. When you're given a task, take notes. Don't trust anything to memory. Try to get memos and notes and summaries of all assignments and meetings. Try to find out what's going to be spoken about at a meeting before it happens, if it's possible, so that you can prepare yourself, do some homework so you understand a little bit about the topic. Take notes. Don't be afraid to ask for someone to help you fill in the blanks. If you need captioning or you need a sign language interpreter, ask for it. Don't try to fake it. I thought for years I was such a great faker, and the truth of the matter was I was not fooling anybody except myself. All right, let's say you're on the job and things aren't going well, and you begin to feel like maybe you're going to be let go, or you feel like you're being downgraded for something you can't help. It's really important for you to take a deep breath, take your pulse. Have you disclosed your hearing difficulty? If you don't disclose what you need, your employer can't help you. Did you point out what you needed in a calm and composed way? Did you ask for an accommodation? And were you able to justify that? When you request an accommodation in a workplace, be prepared to justify that. Now, does that mean you have to turn over your complete medical history? No. But if you're saying that you have a hearing loss that substantially impacts one or more activities of daily living, including communication on the job, you need to be prepared to document that. It may be as simple as providing a copy of your audiogram. So, you pointed out what you needed in a calm and composed way, you requested an accommodation, you did your homework to provide the employer with sources of that accommodation and information that would be necessary to provide it. Was an effort made to accommodate you? Remember, they don't have to give you what you asked for, but they do need to make an effort to accommodate you with something that's equally effective. And the real bottom line is, were you treated differently from a person without a disability? What that means is, were you denied access to or participation in the activity of service? Were you told to go to a training and you needed a sign language interpreter for that training and one wasn't provided, and they told you, if you want one, you'll have to pay for it yourself? Well, that's a denial of access to communication. Same thing for captioning. Were you told to watch a webinar or video that would be required for on-the-job training and it wasn't made accessible to you? All of those things. But you really have to be careful, because you want to be able to prove that you did all the right things. And this is where the Information in the Job Accommodation Network and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission document can help you with a greater understanding of what the right things are. So, resources. Hearing Loss Association has wonderful videos. They have a series of 7 4-minute videos on everything you could ever want to know about hearing loss. You can access it from the web. It's captioned. They'll send you a DVD. Can help you, if you're kind of new to this, understand what's happening to you, why it's happening, and what you can do about it. I love these. Find a chapter. This is the Hearing Loss Association of America website, and you can click on support HLAA chapters and state organizations, and you can find a listing of the chapters. Really, really important. Don't go this alone. Job Accommodation Network, I've talked about it a lot. This is actually a governmentally funded organization. They're funded by the United States Department of Labor. I think the world of them, and you will never get steered wrong from these folks. So I would like to encourage you to check them out. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that's where the other document came from. They have lots of information. If you have to file a complaint, I hope you don't, but if you do, you're going to end up going through these folks. So I would encourage you to get familiar with their website, particularly the facts about hearing loss and deafness. National Association of the Deaf. Great organization. These people have been very, very strong advocates for the rights of persons who are deaf and hard of hearing. I think that they really push the envelope, and I think they do important work. They are the premier civil rights organization for persons who are deaf and hard of hearing, and they work very, very hard to preserve and promulgate deaf culture. Association of Late-Deafened Adults. I like this group a lot. To me, they deal a lot with the psychosocial aspects of living well with hearing loss. They don't really care what you use to accommodate your hearing loss, whether you are an oral deaf person or a person who communicates with sign language or somebody who just sort of wings it or speech reads. They don't care. Whatever works is their motto, and they sort of meet you where you're at and make you feel accepted, and there's just a lot to be said for that. If you're still in school, the Alexander Graham Bell Association has a lot of information for supporting the oral approach to education and communicating orally. If you're a person with vision and hearing loss, the American Association of Deafblind can help you tremendously. You do not have to be totally deaf or totally blind in order to legitimately call yourself deafblind. All you have to have is vision and hearing loss to a degree that it substantially impacts one or more activities of daily living. So these are some of the resources, and we're just about out of time. I'd just like to review that we talked about becoming aware of some of the communication needs that your hearing loss is causing you, what the law says about accommodations and your rights and responsibilities and how to get up to speed on that, where to find information on low-tech and high-tech options that will help you overcome your barriers, how to select accommodations and figure out what works for you, how to effectively self-advocate, and tips to make your life a little bit easier. If you have a burning question that we haven't covered, I would like to encourage you to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And Nancy, do we have any questions in the chat room?
The Belk would like to know if the PowerPoint will be available after the webinar. And if it's okay with you, Valerie, I can go ahead and post that on the webinar page.
That's fine. Great. I'm happy for you to do that. Thank you.
Okay, will do. Anybody else have any burning questions for Valerie? Valerie, this was really amazing. So much great information, and I know that people will want to get in and replay this time and time again throughout their careers, for sure. Great resources. Let me see if there's any questions. The statistics, Beth is asking about $1 spent provided $40 in benefits. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Beth says, I'd like Valerie to mention the statistic in your article. $1 spent provided $40 in benefits.
Those are some statistics that have been compiled by other people, and it's powerful. I can get, if you email me, I can get that reference for you.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions at the moment. what I found really interesting was that only 30% of speech readers, only 30% is what they get. I found that really surprising.
It's very surprising. That is what we call the myth of speech reading.
I can tell you that our expert speech readers in this office would probably beg to differ with that. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I just want to remind you that this webinar will be available for replay on our webinar tab in the HLAA online portal. And if you wouldn't mind just going there afterward tonight to take the survey that we have posted there, that would be very much appreciated. And I want to, I know this isn't posted yet, but just let you know that our webinar in February, on the 19th of February from 8 till 9 Eastern Time, will be presented by Juliet Sturkins, and it's going to be how to start a hearing loop initiative in your community. A very popular topic, and I want to thank Valerie again very much. Valerie will be at convention, not just as a board member, but she's also presenting this presentation live on Thursday, June 26th at 3 p.m. So be there, and you can ask any questions you might have forgotten to ask tonight. Again, thanks so much, Valerie. We really appreciate it. Good night.
Thank you, Nancy. Good night. Good night, one and all.